The late afternoon sun in Oak Valley felt like an oven door left ajar as Andre Brooks eased his rented silver Hyundai onto Sycamore Avenue. He hadn't been home in nearly 2 years. His mother's stroke had pulled him back, and now finally a weekend of warm cornbread, cold milk, and lemon cookies awaited on her porch. But the humid Georgia air cracked with tension the moment he signaled a lane change. A black and white cruiser slipped into his blind spot. No lights, no siren, just silent authority stalking him block after block. 5 houses drifted past before the patrol car's red and blue halo snapped on siren blaring. Before we continue, we'd really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us get closer to 1,000 subscribers. It means the world to us. Thank you so much, Andre. His pulse stayed steady, but a familiar knot tightened in his chest. Hands flat on the wheel, he coasted to a stop at the corner of Willow and 9th, careful not to jerk or breath too deeply. In the passenger seat, the brown paper bag trembled slightly, his mother's favorite treats packed in hopeful innocence. He glanced in the mirror. Officer Reagan Harper's mirrored sunglasses gleamed like accusation. Her stance was rigid, hand hovering near her holster. She waited unreadable. He reminded himself, hands visible, voice calm. This wasn't about speed or seatbelts, it was about skin badge and unspoken rules. One moment he'd been a systems consultant touched by his mother's recovery. The next he'd become a suspect in a ritual older than Oak Valley itself. The street was empty, the trees heavy with heat. Only the Corvette quiet hum of cicadas bore witness. As Harper stepped forward, lips pressed into a thin line, Andre felt reality shift. His simple return home had become a high-stakes dance with power and prejudice. Every move watched, every breath judged. And in that glare of authority, an unspoken question burned. How do you prove your innocence when obedience itself is treated as guilt? The driver's door groaned as it opened, and Officer Reagan Harper, mid-40s, skin bronzed by unrelenting Georgia sun, mirrored aviators glowing with midday glare, stepped forward. Her uniform was immaculate badge catching every glint of light. License and registration, she announced, voice dry and clipped like ash on the wind. Andre's fingers hovered before he eased the black Department of Defense folder from the glove box. The matte cover felt heavy with implication. He lifted it into view. These plates are DoD issued, he said evenly. They don't appear in civilian databases. You'll need a restricted access portal to verify them. Silence stretched thick as humid air. Harper's broad shoulders filled the doorway, a barrier of authority daring him to challenge it. Behind her, Officer Voss lingered at the bumper, feigning a taillight inspection, while his eyes never left Andre. The cicadas droned their oppressive chorus, the day's heat pressing in like a vice. Every move Andre made was under scrutiny. He sat back into the seat, hands gripping the steering wheel, pulse steady but mind racing. In his throat, one question hovered unspoken. What have I done wrong? He exhaled slowly, voice clear when he finally spoke. On what legal basis may I be ordered out of this vehicle? Harper's lips twitched an almost imperceptible reaction. Voss shifted his weight, hand drifting nearer his holstered weapon, as if rehearsing the next step. The world beyond the windshield seemed to vanish. No passing cars, no neighbors, only the 2 officers and the silent weight of decades-old biases. Andre's heart remained calm, but tension coiled in his chest. His mother's simple errands, cornbread milk, lemon cookies, felt suddenly dangerous. Each beat of his heart echoed his resolve he would not blench, would not apologize for his presence. Harper inhaled measured, as though gathering the force to assert her power. In that pregnant moment, Andre recognized the truth of this encounter. It was never going to be routine. Sycamore Avenue had become a silent battlefield where uniformed authority tested his right to be there and where every second could tip into confrontation. Step out of the vehicle. Officer Harper's voice cut through the thick roadside air like a blade. Andre's gaze met hers without flinch. He eased himself up, moving slowly so his hands remained visible on the hood. Each motion felt magnified under the oppressive silence of Sycamore Avenue, where empty yards and sagging porches bore witness. Harper offered no explanation. Instead, she keyed her radio, summoning backup. Behind her, Officer Voss planted a firm hand on his baton posture, rigid as if awaiting a command the world hadn't yet whispered. In that suspended moment, power lay unspoken, an invisible fist tightening around Andre's throat. Without warning, Harper lunged. Her grip yanked him forward. His thigh slammed hard against the metal. Agonizing heat shot through him, but he clenched his teeth and held still, refusing to give her the reaction she seemed to seek. He lifted his chin, eyes hard and steady like flint. "This is wrong," he said, voice low but unyielding. She didn't answer. Instead, she bent to secure cuffs around his wrists, snapping them behind his back with mechanical precision. The cold steel bit into his skin, leaving red lines that felt like fresh indignities. Andre's chest tightened, not from breathlessness, but from the sting of injustice. "I've done nothing wrong," he began, voice strained. "Please tell me why." But the final words died on his lips as Harper shoved him into the cruiser's rear seat and slammed the door. The echo of metal on metal reverberated down the silent street. Andre heard the engine turn over. Through tinted glass, he caught Harper's reflection badge, shining expression unreadable. In that instant, he understood the harsh truth of this encounter. It wasn't about law or safety. It was about power, rigid and unchallenged, forcing him into a narrative he never chose. And as the cruiser rolled away, Andre vowed he would not disappear into the dark again. Inside the station's sterile walls, Andre was processed like a faceless number. He stood as officers inked his fingerprints and snapped mugshots under harsh fluorescent lights. "No, you have the right to remain silent. No call to an attorney." The chill radiating from the concrete bench seeped through his clothes, mingling with the sharp scent of bleach and cold metal. He was led to a cell whose steel door slammed shut with a hollow echo that bounced endlessly down the corridors. No one offered him water. No one explained the charge beyond the clipped accusation of obstruction of justice. Each staccato click of the distant printer felt like a hammer forging chains around his identity. In that fluorescent gloom, time stretched long and merciless. As shadows pulled in the corners, Andre pressed his back against the wall, gaze fixed on the tiny slot in the door. His breath evened out. "Not this time," he whispered, voice low but resolute. In the oppressive hush, he held onto that promise he would not vanish into silence again. Early the next morning, the front door of Oak Valley PD swung open to reveal Damian Clark, college classmate turned civil rights attorney badge, clipped to his belt, and a court-issued subpoena clenched in his hand, demanding immediate access to the cruiser's dashcam footage. He moved with quiet confidence through the echoing halls, stopping outside the interrogation room, where Officer Harper sat behind her desk, head bowed and silent. She lowered her gaze, unable to meet his steady stare, as he slid the subpoena across the wood-grain surface. Within hours, the hallowed secrecy of internal affairs was breached. The footage was secured, and Andre Brooks was unshackled, released on his own recognizance, with faint red rings still etched on his wrists. At the modest rental closer to downtown walls, plastered with faded paint and a single ceiling fan, humming, Damian and Andre convened around a battered coffee table. The laptop's screen glowed in the dim light as Damian clicked play. Every moment of the traffic stop was laid bare, the slow motion of Andre's deliberate compliance, the precise angle of Harper's shove, the sudden flash of metal handcuffs. Damian's pen raced across his notepad with methodical precision, annotating the timestamp of each movement, each pause, every syllable of dogged silence that punctuated the shove. The official report, he noted, spoke of aggressive movement and defiant posture, and accounted at odds with the clear evidence. Across the table, Andre pressed his back against the chairs and cradled a steaming mug, knuckles whitening around the handle. It hit him like a rallying cry. This wasn't just his case. It was about every individual whose rights were quietly erased under the rubric of failure to comply. In that cramped room, they forged a shared determination to transform a single dashcam tape into an unignorable call for accountability. Late that night, Lila Morgan slipped through the rain-slicked streets of Oak Valley and into the back corner booth of the nearly empty Java Bean Cafe, her footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. In her arms, she carried a thick, officially sealed dossier, the culmination of 6 years' worth of suppressed complaints against Officer Harper. Inside were dozens of near-identical arrest reports from warehouse laborers, delivery drivers, and even a 17-year-old high school student, each accusing Harper of failure to comply and using a confrontational tone, only to have their cases quietly dropped. Lila's voice trembled just barely as she slid the folder across the scarred tabletop to Andre and Damian. Their faces, illuminated by the cafe's dull yellow lamp, went stone still as they flipped it open. Each carefully tabbed section revealed a pattern so stark it felt like a map of injustice. Names, dates, summaries, all echoing the same cold dismissal of black men disadvantaged by the system they had sworn to protect. With a steadying breath, Lila produced a simple, handwritten affidavit, her signature scrawled at the bottom like an anchor in a storm of silence. The weight of her words, unadorned, unembellished, hung heavy in the air. I witnessed these reports buried year after year, while victims suffered in silence. Damien closed the dossier, tucking it beneath his arm as he nodded. They would not wait for a new scandal to break before crying enough. In that hushed late-night cafe, they agreed on their next steps: immediate filing into the courthouse's public record, formal submission to every level of the Oak Valley judicial hierarchy, and public release to independent journalists. As the neon sign outside sputtered and the door clicked shut behind them, the three walked into the empty streets with purpose burning behind their eyes. They carried more than paper, they carried the voices of the silenced, poised to shatter the shielding walls of procedural indifference and expose a system that had allowed so many to be wronged and forgotten. News of the sealed complaints spread like wildfire. At the Oak Valley Community Center, Andre and Damien launched weekly Know Your Rights workshops every Tuesday evening, drawing overflowing rows of folding chairs packed with teenagers, retirees, and even a few uniformed officers sitting quietly in the back. Each session became a platform for a new testimony, men and women stepping up to share their own encounters with Officer Harper's unchecked authority. Andre opened every meeting the same way: when enough of us speak, the system can't pretend we don't exist. He guided participants through practical steps: how to document an encounter, secure video evidence, and file official complaints. As each name was called and each story told, a living chain of proof formed, binding the community together in shared outrage and determination. These gatherings did more than educate, they galvanized Oak Valley into public debate. Local media covered the packed room, council members were pressed for reform, and Harper's defense grew weaker under the weight of dozens of first-hand accounts. The workshops transformed individual pain into collective power, pushing the Harper case into the harsh light of public scrutiny. The preliminary hearing convened in a hushed courtroom under the watchful gaze of Judge Loretta Banks. As the overhead lights dimmed, the Dashcam footage flickered to life on the screen: the sharp shove against the hot metal hood, the clip of cold steel as handcuffs snapped behind Andre's back, his stillness amid the storm of authority. A heavy silence followed before the first witness, Wallace, given a retired forklift operator, was sworn in. With a steady voice, he recounted how he'd been yanked from his truck and herded into cuffs years ago, only to watch his dignity vanish under the same scripted language of noncompliance. Next, Gerald Wesley, a former custodian now in his late 60s, described the day he dared to ask why and was met with fearsome force rather than an answer. Finally, Lila Morgan, the courthouse records clerk, presented the sealed 6-year archive. Dozens of complaints, all sealed and forgotten, each echoing identical phrasing: refused lawful orders, aggressive tone, then quietly buried. Damien Clark rose, turning to face the gallery. With precise calm, he laid out the common denominator, woven through every report: a pattern of intimidation masquerading as protocol, weaponized words in service of prejudice. His words landed like hammers on the iron of denial. Officer Harper, seated at the defense table, fidgeted with her badge, avoiding the eyes of those she once believed untouchable. Each testimony and piece of evidence stripped away another layer of her shielded record. When Judge Banks finally spoke, her tone grave, laced with conviction, she announced that probable cause had been established for formal charges of misconduct in falsifying a police report. For a moment, the courtroom held its breath. Then, in a surge of release, tears and applause broke loose. Masks of complacency fell away. Oak Valley confronted its own hidden history of bias. In that charged moment, the community was forced to reckon not only with one officer's actions, but with the legacy of silence that had let those actions flourish. The gavel fell, and with it, the long-ignored walls of prejudice began to crack. When the gavel finally fell, Officer Harper was found guilty of abuse of power and falsifying her report. Her badge was revoked, and she was barred from ever serving again in law enforcement. Almost overnight, the Oak Valley Police Department came under a sweeping internal review, unsealing decades of closed complaints. Former victims saw their cases reopened. Wallace Gerald and dozens more had their voices validated at last. But Andre Brooks felt little triumph. He returned to leading the Know Your Rights workshops each Tuesday, urging every attendee, regardless of age, to share their own story. Across town, vibrant murals of Lila Wallace and Gerald sprang up on brick walls bearing the rallying cry, "Speak up, don't stay silent." In barbershops and church halls, neighbors now offered quiet nods of solidarity and hands extended in support. Oak Valley, once muted by fear, was waking up one testimony at a time, proof that change can begin when a single story refuses to be ignored. 1 year later, Oak Valley no longer tolerates silence. The newly established Civilian Oversight Council meets monthly in the old precinct building, its walls now hung with portraits of residents who once felt powerless to speak. Eastside High has launched a Justice and Civil Rights course where students analyze the Brooks case alongside historic civil liberties battles, debating how one unlawful shove became the catalyst for enduring change. The state legislature passed a Police Transparency Act requiring every traffic stop complaint and disciplinary action to be logged in a searchable public database. Sealed patrol records, once hidden by bureaucratic decree, are now available online, illuminating years of systemic bias. Andre Brooks, once handcuffed without cause, now travels the region as a guardian of accountability, reminding audiences, our story is far from over. Murals of Lila Morgan Wallace Given and Gerald Wesley still glow on downtown walls, testifying that courage can uproot entrenched injustice. Oak Valley's police department has undergone its most comprehensive internal review to date. Veteran officers attend mandatory de-escalation and implicit bias training sessions, while new community police liaison roles foster daily dialogue. Even the streets feel transformed. Neighbors exchange nods instead of avoidance. 911 callers no longer fear hostility, and local faith leaders preach collective vigilance over passive endurance. On the anniversary of that sweltering afternoon on Sycamore Avenue, the town designated a Speak Out Day, inviting anyone with a witness to step up and share their story. Folding chairs fill the community center each Tuesday for Know Your Rights workshops, where residents of all ages, from teenagers to retirees, learn how to document. Encounters demand transparency and support one another. Though Oak Valley has reclaimed an outward calm, beneath the surface lies a steady current of watchfulness. The single push on a hot hood that once threatened to erase one man's dignity has instead ignited a movement that refuses to fade. When a community chooses not to stay silent, even the deepest prejudices can be exposed, dismantled, and finally overcome. From that story, we learn that a single voice is not merely a shield, but also a catalyst capable of awakening an entire system. Every person who has been wrongfully stopped, judged by the color of their skin, and a badge can now link their experiences into an irrefutable data chain that forces society to confront the prejudice once buried in silence. The message to you is never underestimate the power of your own story, because when enough people speak up, there is no place left for quiet acceptance. Try sharing your personal encounter. When have you faced bias and how did you push back? The comment section below is the fairest forum. Leave your viewpoint and predict when systemic racism might truly end. Is it 2030 or 2075? You, the audience, will map the journey toward justice.